I've been on the board for transitions for many years, and I'm the chair of the education department, the chair of the education committee. And our whole focus has been on trying to create programs that will allow us to measure and show the school district and others how effective the programs are for allowing children to be safe in their environments, regardless of their age. So programs for young children to, say, hands off, don't touch me, all the way up to students understanding dating relationships and how they can stay safe in their engagement with other people. So it's a challenge to be able to develop metrics that allow you to show a school district or other agency how effective things are. So that's been a real challenge for us, but we do have some tremendous people on the staff who are doing outstanding work and constantly pushing the envelope for trying to accomplish all those things.
Why do you think it's important for men to be a part of this movement to end domestic violence?
Well, first and foremost, it's important because men are the main perpetrators of domestic violence, and they need to understand. And to go back to what you mentioned earlier, I formed a group called the Tolerance Troop about 20 plus years ago. And it was a group of high school students, 9 through 12. And then later I incorporated some of the college students that I work with. And what we did is we performed skits, 3 to 5 minutes, that presented controversial situations. And then the characters stayed in character and I facilitated the dialogue. And many times we had skits where it was an abusive relationship with a high school couple. And when the skit was over, we would throw it open to questions and the students would, say, why are you staying with that person? Or how can you let that person treat you like that? Whatever. And so we would get to the reality of how it's so easy when you're looking from a distance at a relationship to be able to judge and say, oh, that's so wrong. But when you're in the midst of it, it's very difficult to distance yourself enough to say, I need to get out of this relationship. And so many times what we would do is we would say to, if a student who asks a question, if you knew that person was in that relationship, what did you do? What did you do to try to help that person? Or did you do what most people do, which is take the path of least resistance and say nothing or ignore it or act like you really don't know that that's going on? And in one case in particular, I had one of the young women in our troop come to me and say, Mr. Edwards, I think this friend of mine is in an abusive relationship. And I said to her, thank you. That's all you need to do. You don't need to solve the problem. That's not your role. Thank you for telling me. And I also shared with her, I said, I don't know exactly what to do as well, but I'm going to take it to someone who I think does know. So I took it to the principal, and the principal gathered this young woman, her parents, and sat with them. And the first thing the mother said when this was brought to her was, I thought that might be happening. That was really all that he followed up with me on, because the rest remained, private. But I know that their relationship did end, and that girl got the help that she needed, and hopefully that young man did as well. And so the whole point is to let people know that if you suspect something like this is going on, especially men, you need to get help. You need to ask for help, or you need to direct people who need help to sources that can provide that.
Could you talk a little bit about how you got into this work? Like what drew you into it?
Wow. I grew up in a really loving household, and that's not to say that my parents didn't yell at each other and fight, but there was a good deal of respect, and they taught me that respect. And so it's just been a part of who I am. And in all honesty, I saw a college group perform what we then later took to the high school. So I was inspired by this group of actors who did the same thing in a presentation that I saw, that I said, there's no reason that high school students couldn't do this as well. And so it just so happened that a colleague of mine was having a little conference. This is when, back in the day when they had home economics. And so she had 4 or 5 different of the regional high schools coming to our high school. And she said, listen, one of the things that our students want to do is put on something for diversity, promoting diversity. And this was back in the early 90s. And so I said, okay, let me throw something together. So I got some students together that I knew were good actors. And I said to them, listen, I'd like to replicate what I saw done and what have you. And so we did some skits on basically homophobia and racism. And when she did the reviews of the program, the conference that she gave, we got the highest scores. And she said, and there were people who said, can you come to our school? Can you come to our school? Can you come to our school? And we said, we're not equipped for this. But eventually, I got permission from our principal and our superintendent to be able to take students out of class during the school day to travel to different schools. And it got to the point where we actually did overnight at some places because it was so far away. So we performed from Pittsburgh to up in northeast corner of Pennsylvania, just about in every area of the state, performing these skits, or at state conferences as well.
That's fantastic. And so one thing that like caught my ear that I think is interesting is, I'm in the prevention team at PCADV, and one of our focuses has been kind of looking at ending all forms of oppression as kind of the root of preventing intimate partner violence and domestic violence. And right. so I just think, talking about like the improv or the troupe that you're talking about, like talking about like homophobia and racism and kind of connecting those things. And I wasn't sure if you would, or if you were willing to kind of like talk about how those things are connected or how you are connecting those.
Right. Well, so to go back to the troupe, none of the skits that we ever performed were scripted. So the whole entire group is improv. That is to say, an agency, a group would say to us, these are the problems that we're having in our school. These are the problems we're having in our community. Can you address these? So we would develop the skits, making the connections that for the most part, what is at the heart and base of all of these issues is a lack of understanding, a lack of empathy, and a sense of an ignorance, a lack of exposure. So if you haven't been around people of color, if you know stereotypes, you're probably going to apply them. If you haven't been around people of different sexual orientation, you are going to go by the stereotypes because you have no real basis in those human beings. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. At a very young age, I was exposed to lots of diversity, sexual orientation, color. My high school was a miniature UN. I met people from Armenia. I didn't even know where Armenia was. So I grew up in a high school and an environment where I was exposed early on to all of these differences, and I embraced them. So our whole strategy is to try to point out that you might not necessarily be a bad person. You are just inexperienced and ignorant in terms of your interaction with people who are different from you. And once you figure out that even though this person is gay, or despite the fact that this person is gay, this person's a nice, intelligent human being. And once that comes about, it's much easier to convince people to see the individual and not the stereotypes that are usually draped over them. I look at our situation right now with COVID and how as a state, we are doing pretty well. I credit Governor Wolf for really, holding in the reins of all these people who just want to blow the state open, what have you. And I also credit Dr. Rachel Levine. And it pains me to hear of all the names that she has been called because she is transgender, And I'm going, all of these people, one, are conflating their anger at not being able to do what they want to do, go out and drink, go do whatever, and so on and so forth, losing sight of the fact that she is concerned about our safety. And it just blows my mind. And so again, it's ignorance. I would take those people and say, look at Arizona, look at Texas, look at Georgia. Those governors blew open the doors and said, let's go, open everything up. And now they're where New York was in April. And so the biggest enemy we have to fight is ignorance. That's the biggest enemy we have to fight, regardless of the issues.
No, well said, for sure. And so my final question is, if you just had, you might have already said it, but if you had one thing to kind of, to pass out, one thing to say to your community or the broader community, what would that be?
So the area here, the central Pennsylvania area, the newspaper, the Daily Item, is what most people read. And right now they're featuring Black Lives Here. And they've interviewed 8 of us, 4 men, 4 women, ranging from age 69 down to age 19, about what it's like to be a Black person in central Pennsylvania. And that series is running right now. I was the second person to be featured. And it's giving all of these different perspectives. And so it's allowing people to learn about us, to see how we've been treated, to see how we've reacted, to see how we have chosen to stay here despite some of the obstacles that we have faced. So what I would say is, you need to look at people as individuals. And as a teacher, that's one of the challenges. I don't think it is the right strategy to look at the classroom and say, I'm going to treat everyone the same. Everyone is not the same, and you are not able to do that. You need to look at individual needs. So if this student needs more of my attention because she is not writing complete sentences, I'm going to give that student more of my attention. If this student over here needs more of my time to sort out his thoughts, to make them cogent, then I'm going to give the student more time. I'm not just going to stand up in front and say, okay, all of you have to be getting this at the same time, and you have to understand it and digest it, because we're going to move on. So too many times, and this is where stereotypes come from, I look at one person, I throw all the characteristics of that stereotypical group, whether the person's gay or Latino or Asian or whatever. We need to be looking at individuals and saying, okay, is this person treating me with respect, which then earns my respect, or is this person being a jerk, in which case I don't want that person in my company, because there are just some people you're not going to reach. And I'll end by talking about the fact that I teach in one of my college courses, the literature course, I teach No Exit by Jean-Paul Sartre. And it's a play about these 3 people who are locked in a hotel room, and they learn that it's hell. And the hell is that the 3 of them are driving each other crazy. And so what I teach my students is, listen, this is life. If people around you are treating you like crap, you can control not being around them. You might not be able to change their minds, but you can take yourself out of that situation. And that's the key. You're not going to convince everybody of the same opinions that you have, but if people are making your life a living hell, then you need to remove yourself from that situation and find people who will treat you with respect and dignity. And that is the key to being a civil human being in the society.
Awesome. Thank you so much for